No, I thought a lot about what you mentioned, and when I saw your questions, kind of like put me in a reflection zone. And that was it's hard to put into simple sentences that year. Actually, 15 months, not a year.
I don't know about you, but myself, after we got home and I hurried up, got out of Dodge, like most people, uh, got out of Dodge, and I kind of suppressed it. And then after a few more years, maybe got a little therapy. But yeah, it's definitely tough doing all these reconnections and talking to people. It's made me, rehash stuff, bring things up, put some pieces of the puzzle together. As you were saying earlier, age has helped us with some of our maybe thoughts or decisions or opinions about certain things.
I would have never thought the things we would have carried from that year. Like I know we got through it, but it definitely, I think it became like a fabric, like a cloak that you wear invisibly. And, when I reconnect with some of the soldiers, it's always there. Makuba it was its own place.
Yeah, I mean, and you get into some of the perspective you had as a company commander and HAC, so you had the whole staff, so you got to see all the stuff. But we did that train up JRTC. I remember rolling around with you in a 113 as we went to hang out with the guys in the little town next to the little fob or whatever. But the whole is very ambiguous of where we were going. It was like, okay, we're going to deploy, but we don't know exactly what. We don't know what mission. And then all of a sudden, for those of us that were in the know, it switched. It was like, okay, the deployment date's going to get moved up. Oh, by the way, you're going to Bakuba. And I
Mhm.
remember certain individuals that did do the PS, was it the pre-deployment site survey, the PDSS?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they were like, "Yeah, there's this one place, Bakuba, and that's definitely where we don't wanna go." And then all of a sudden, it's like, "Oh, that's where we're going." And it was like, "Oh, no train or not train up." We didn't get a big intel dump from the unit, so it was this big mystery of Cuba. Where are we going?
And I remember we were doing a staff meeting with the brigade commander, and we were discussing all the pre-deployment training that'd be required. And there was a point where he was briefing and he said we would not be bringing our tanks or our Bradleys because they would not be necessary. And all the company commanders, we all sat there and we like looked down and we knew that that was wrong, especially our experiences with first CAV when we went in 2004 and how that definitely went bad and we had to bring the tanks over and all the heavy platforms. And I remember, I can't remember, I want to say it might have been the Alpha Company commander. I can't remember who it was at the time, but he mentioned that he goes, "Sir, this is not a wise decision." And I remember the brigade commander who had not deployed, um, and he makes the comment, he goes, the, the situation has changed. There's no need for those vehicles. We won't have any need or use. We know the result.
Yeah, and that I mean, that correlates or coincides with, the group of us that went up Torch got to Warhorse, and the unit that we replaced was like, yeah, we don't use main rounds. We don't fire those things. And I think we took over, and within the first 72 hours, the first main round was put through a building. And I was like,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
it was immediate. I don't, uh, I don't think I can remember the tempo ever not being anything less than hot. I mean, it was just a surrounding experience, you know. That definitely.
I mean, and I would love to talk with Captain Morris at some points because we were all torch and I think you and I shared. I talked with Turf, and it was just this weird feeling of being told, "Oh yeah, we're focusing on downsizing. This fob's getting closed. Everything is okay." And then you see IEDs and hear IEDs going off like on the other side of the fence of the fob, and you're like, "I don't think everything is okay." But
Mhm.
that was like the messaging of, "Yep, everything's okay. We do mosque monitoring. It's gonna be a chill year. You guys are gonna just shut this place down." And then, like what you're saying, as soon as the official right seat, left seat ride is done, and the up tempo just started from there, and it did not go down until 14 months later.
And remember the chow hall, that big circus tent, and it had all the multiple units that were required for that large uh, building or a feeding place. And when everyone left, it was just our battalion. And remember how small the footprint we occupied in that large circus tent. If there was ever a symbol that showed how small and how big the job was at hand, I mean, like, I always remember, like, looking around going, "Oh my god, we're by ourselves." At least the food was good.
Yeah, the food was good. But yes, that is a great way to describe the beginning of that deployment. It's when the unit we ripped with and others left. Yeah, one battalion in that giant circus tent for chow. We had enough space. Everybody had elbow room. Nobody was sitting too close. Give us a little introduction. Who is Alex? You can tell us about your military experience before Bakuba. If you want to touch on the I don't know if you want to share exactly a Jim Rainey story about, putting all your stuff, but if you want to talk about, your previous experience in the bat or whatever, but please introduce, whatever, however you'd like to introduce yourself to this project.
Well, thanks, Mike, and I appreciate the space to have this conversation. Took a few minutes to kinda write some notes down just to help kinda put me on a guide book, 'cause you can't help but tell the story without feeling emotions, and this will actually be the first time I actually talked about the Cuba in this kind of setting. But if I was to say so, my name is Alexis Rivera. I was born in Puerto Rico. I served just over 30 years in the U.S. Army, first as an enlisted soldier, and then later I was commissioned armor officer. And then over that time, I served both in combat and institutional roles, including multiple deployments. But what I'm sharing today, I don't think is meant to be dramatic or heroic, that's for sure. There are better soldiers than me that did that. But it's simply my experience and the perspective I gained over that time. Before Bakuba, I'd already spent a significant part of my life in the Army. And I enlisted in the late 80s. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I was an infantry soldier at the beginning, and by the time I left, I was a sergeant ranger. That felt great. I thought I was on top of the world and knew how to solve every tactical problem. I deployed early in my career during Operation Just Cause in Panama. And, to compare that experience to what we went through, it's not that that was any less, but it felt like we accomplished something. You didn't leave feeling like we had lost, whether that's physical, spiritual, or however you want to term that. But later, when I went to college, I earned my commission. I served in armor and cavalry units and leadership roles. I was a platoon leader, a company commander, multiple staff assignments. I culminated as a battalion commander. I loved that job as a 135 Armor Battalion Commander. Bakuba was a big, big, big part of who I was as a battalion commander, and definitely how I trained my battalion. By the time I went to Bakuba in 2006 with you and all the rest, I'd already deployed to Iraq once before in Baghdad in 2004. I was with our first CAV. I was with Charlie Company then. And if you remember that experience, we were caught by surprise also. And we all felt that we were returning back to Iraq. Not sure in what capacity or how, but we all knew we were coming back. I was experienced. I felt confident and professionally successful. I believed in the mission at the time. I believed in leadership, and I believed that if you worked hard enough and you took care of your people, things would make sense in the end. It's a little bit about my military experience before Bakuba. I didn't see myself as fragile. I saw myself as capable, prepared, and resilient. Of course, all that would be tested in that particular tour. Hopefully, that kind of covers a little bit of what you might have been looking for.
Yeah, no, that's a great intro. And so you brought up the points of deploying before Ranger Battalion, being actual in the battalion, not just a Ranger qualified. You were a bat guy and got your deployments and just cause and I wouldn't say immediate gratification, but there was a tangible result when you came home. And then talking about '04, that was first deployments. You were in Charlie Company before we all reflagged and came together under the 112 banner. Yes, that first deployment, there was a different feeling. I mean, the IEDs were smaller, the different areas that we all operated in. I know you were in Baghdad, while 27, who became 112. We were up in Taji. Then, so it was a different time period. Then
Yeah,
we all come
yeah.
home. Like you said, we knew we were going to deploy again. We just didn't know how soon or when. And then we start building the team for the second deployment, the '06, '08, which we did not know it'd be that long.
No, and I remember that, for us, a lot of our intel was what the media was providing, through the traditional TV and media, and it was all bad. You could tell as we were leading up to it, that there wasn't a feeling that it was going to be ending soon or maybe in the manner we desired, but we knew we were going. That I could never really explain it, but it was just this feeling in your stomach. This, like, yeah, we all had this sixth sense of, no one could tell us really that it wasn't going to be difficult.
Yeah, like you said, that sick feeling, and you saw it in the media, but then it also, at least from my perspective, and we were talking before we got started, the train up. Like I remember a different train up for '04. We went to NTC multiple times. You went to
Yeah,
JRTC. Even your home training events were more orchestrated. Maybe that would be a good term. But, we go to our train up before this '06, '08 deployment, and the FTX lanes or the stick lanes, everything just had a different feel. And then when we go to JRTC, it seemed very scripted in a we don't know kind of manner.
oh, that's perfect. That's not to knock the the national training centers. They're doing what they can, but it was exactly that. It was like a script, and here are the required events that this unit has to be able to conduct. And there has to be some kind of effort shown that shows us as capable, but against an enemy, many times it was immeasurable. That quantity and the consistency, the tempo, it was hard to replicate that in the way we endured it. And so I remember each had its own, there were some good things, but coherently, I didn't feel like, man, I don't have a really true understanding of what we're facing over there. Like we all kind of, like in the old days, which is now what pure state on state, the threat now that they talk about, like, oh, there's the bad guy and we train up and we're going to do this and he does that and we react. That's a playbook that can be analyzed, but against the threat that we were dealing with, it was difficult. And that caused, I think, everyone to have their own little narrative in our own mind on how we thought we would deal with that because we all had different opinions on it. And, we trusted the leadership, but you could see in some cases that they didn't quite understand it either. And I think when you see that from the lowest level all the way up, that creates, I'm trying to capture the words that maybe fit the statement in the time, that it makes you think that the purpose is lacking. We knew the direction, but the purpose was not coherent, if that can make any sense.
It makes total sense because that sums it up. And then come the curveballs. And, I kind of coined and named a couple of these curveballs, things that I just called them. But one I called was the mitt purge. If you remember when all of a sudden it comes down this requirement, okay, you're deploying. All right. You're going to deploy maybe early. By the way, we want, a quarter of the staff and we want so many people out of the companies to stand up and now figure out what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Go.
Man, that was a painful. And, we all knew that we didn't want to have our mid team suffering. Those guys are going to be out there by themselves. But on the other hand, you need a staff, a functioning staff, and you need certain key soldiers to fill certain roles so the battalion can function. And when you start pulling apart the essence of how a unit operates, it really becomes difficult. And I remember that was stressful. Who are we going to send over and how are we going to take care of them and how are we going to take care of ourselves? I think about the company commanders, they had to give up. I think about what our mortars and our scouts had to do. The scouts picking up a little bit more of their traditional role. They were more of a force multiplier, but the mortars were turned into a PSD and also had to do their mission. But there was times when we looked at them to go over there and help. Everybody had to give
Everybody had
up
to
a
give up
lot.
a
That
lot.
was
That
a
was a
tough
tough
time, just
time,
trying to
just
make
trying
that
to make
mission
that mission
happen.
happen.
Yeah, give up a lot. Like mortars. Well, I don't remember. You can correct me on the mortars, but like the scouts, no platoon leader. It became Sarah Haynes.
Yeah.
The S2 shop, we gave up Captain Horden. So, now you got a newly promoted captain as the who hasn't been to career course as the S2. I mean, and that's just a glimpse of it. But yeah, I mean, and Haynes was the man, the myth, the legend that he was, and now he's a platoon leader because we're like you said, we're just trying to make ends meet and still accomplish the mission.
Which puts so much stress on that platoon. When you take a key leader away from, a key role, yeah, we can perform the job. I mean, we're trained to do that, but that comes with a timeline. There's a reason why you can only run so far before you get tired. That we had to do it. When I look back on those years, when I think about what we gave up and what our guys went through, especially with the mid teams, they were out there and, I was with Andy, Colonel Posnick, our beloved friend. I remember him telling me, he's like, man, I had no idea how we were going to communicate with them and be able to help in the way that we need to. And so, of course, we had the QRS. So we're always planning. We're always trying to figure out how we could make sure that we could respond. I totally forgot about the mid teams, even though they were part of our lives every day. I think we approached it the right way. They were part of the battalion still, and I think that's how I kind of remember. Which is why when people mentioned mid teams, I was like, when you mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, we had those because for so long, if it was a mid team, they were part of the battalion. I just felt because we were always out there with them, and maybe that was probably the better approach. I want to say it was. It makes me feel better to say that, especially with our SF buddy. I won't mention his name. He's probably in the black books, He's done so well.
Yeah, but he's actually working, get some permission. He wants to participate in all this, and just from his time as a normal officer. But no, yeah, taking care of the MIT teams because especially with more time in the Army, I've learned, and look at how you teach attachments and so on, and how many times do people look at that's just an attachment and forget about them, where instead of just being some random MIT team that is operating our, they were from our battalion, our brigade. So there was that connection that these are still our guys.
Yeah, it's the flag. It's the reason why it's on our uniform. It's important. At places, it just was different. I guess it wasn't one event or one bad day. It was just the environment, you know. The tempo, it just never stopped. That violence was just constant, it was unpredictable. It was always close, and I think we all carried the responsibility, especially as a staff, every minute, as we're trying to make sure everyone's there, getting what they need. But sometimes when I think about that time, I always think about the radio. And it's like, for us, it's the radio, it unifies the whole unit. And yet that's the drama of life on the radio. Every morning, every evening, it never turned off 24/7. So as you remember, we go in the talk, there was always somebody, whether they were in contact or not, even if it was a routine patrol. I remember sometimes we'd be going to go eat, and of course we were the only guys out there, and you would hear that loud boom. And I remember our response would be, "Oh man, that's got to be Bone Crusher, that's gotta be is that Crazy Horse? Just by directionally, we knew where they were occupying or what patrols were out there. You know, that was, I think about that radio probably more than anything. Even to this day, I don't even like the cell phone. When people call, I don't wanna hear it. Like, I don't wanna hear bad news. I don't wanna hear it's like, if you wanna catch up with me, let's meet, or let's set a time where we talk like you and me, family, but the chit chat, I can't do it anymore. Maybe that's a little bit of a legacy there from that place.
Yeah. I mean, like you were saying, it started early and it was continuous of the radio being associated with bad. And then the bad would go to worse very quickly. I mean, we were there only a few weeks and the first casualty started and it just didn't stop.
Yeah, I'll never forget that day. That's when the radio first started. I remember the scouts changing their name, and so I didn't recognize the call sign. And I remember when they said, "Hey, we have a casualty," and I remember the first thing that came across my mind was, "Oh, thank God." I felt relieved that it wasn't our guy, but I was sad that, someone had suffered a loss. And then, of course, we quickly realized who it was, and then it became completely a different experience. Are we allowed to talk about him?
Oh yeah, yeah. Then that's yes. I mean, that's definitely something that we are talking a lot about is the man who Sergeant Haynes and everyone else
Alright,
involved in that day was. Um, you, I mean, we did the train up, we did time before. You were his commander for a while, and for the core of us who've worked together with 27, we were with Haynes for many years. So yes, we feel free to talk about Sergeant Haynes and anything else you'd like to share.
well, I mean, obviously, there's just nothing I can say about him that could be bad. He represented a lot of what was the unit. Especially as the scout out there alone. Unafraid. But yet he held a role more than just his status as a platoon sergeant. Like he was just like the part of the planks in that unit, especially in our company. And so when you think of a casualty, that's the last name you would ever expect to be listed. And so when, even during that day is the day, I think it was later in the afternoon. I remember it was hot. I was with then Major Posnick. We had just come back. I think we had just visited Gabe, maybe. I don't even remember. George, I think is the name of the mid team, or we'd been doing something when the radio was playing out, and I think it was Sergeant Gallardo that was making the calls and doing the reporting, and somehow it gets clarified. Then we find out it truly is Sergeant Haynes, and that sinking feeling. And we all experienced loss throughout the war, multiple ways. But for some reason, his was the one that hit the hardest because of who he was and what he represented to the unit. And so it was like he took something out of our heart, and it never got filled back. No one could fill that position. No one ever could do what or replace the position he held. And I always felt that as we kind of ground our way through that tour, it was like you just knew this is for real. Like we knew it was for real before, but it was a different reality now that had set in, and it didn't slow down. Wow, that was a tough time.
It was a extremely tough time, and often say, Sergeant Haynes was like a true believer. He truly believed in the mission, truly believed in what we were doing. He was all about the hearts and minds of the local population. I mean, there's stories and there's just so much about him that, like you were saying, part of the core of the unit. A lot of the guys we always talked about how he was like the leader of the misfit toys. He just took everybody under his wings. It didn't matter. He'd take you in. He included you. He built his little teams of teams and empowered you to go forward and do great things. And I would always say in our company, headquarters that we had before the deployment, I loved being early for PT, going to the scout and mortar's office. You remember how they had that like joint classroom that they turned into an office, but you would just go in there and have these deep and off the wall conversations, and there'd be Sergeant Haynes in his desk, Sergeant Gallardo. I'd sit on the couch. Everyone else would
Yeah,
just be
yeah.
in there, and it was just always it just kind of summed things up of just how pre-PT was.
You know, I've forgotten about that office.
The worst team room ever, I guess. I don't know what I'd call that thing, but yeah, the classroom turned into an office, and but yes, great morning spent in there talking. But like I was saying, he really believed in the mission. I mean, we all do the mission. It's the orders, but he truly just believed in what he was doing.
It really did. And, I find that so commendable in him because it helped me. You have to believe in something. Everyone had a different reason for why we were there, but he was the one that helped me kind of, you know what? Maybe we all have a different understanding of why we're there, but we do have one unifying purpose is to come home. And that was the goal. That was it. You know, and I remember telling the soldiers, don't think about what you're hearing on TV. Don't, what's coming across on media. Just focus on what we're doing here, why we're doing it, and everyone getting home. And I remember that came from a lot of talks with Sergeant Haynes. You know, I remember one time I think I even says like, "You really believe what we're doing?" He's like, "Yes, sir, I do." And like, didn't no hesitation. It was and it was just it was uplifting. I had those conversations that I had with him were some of my special moments of that unit. You know, he was he'll definitely always be with me. He's definitely a part of that guide on. He is definitely one of the key soul members.
Yes, he was. I mean, I think summed up Sergeant Haynes very well. So as you were saying, that November, I mean, right off the bat, that's where it started. Constant up and down, but high up tempo, a lot of the radio never stopping. And oh, by the way, now we have some more change. We're trying to shake things up, and you kind of get tapped to still be a company commander, but yet now we want, well, not we. I did not say, "Hey, this is gonna be your new job," but you get tapped and said, "Hey, now it's time to be the few FUOps and company commander." So talk us through some of that or your feelings of that time period.
I was angry. I'd done that job several times. It's not enjoyable, but I couldn't argue with the reasoning. And when Major Posnick first approached me and talked to me about it, I remember him saying, "Is like it's not, you can't think about what's good for you. We got to think about what's best for the unit." And he put it in ways I couldn't say no. And said at that time, I had the right experiences. Um, that matched what the unit needed me to be at. And so when I look back on it now, I know that that was the right decision. So I went in there, be here I am, the company commander, like, okay, well, I got Frank, Wendell Franklin, my first sergeant, tremendous first sergeant. No one can question his dedication to the mission, his technical and tactical abilities. So I knew he could take care of that company, and he did. And so I go in there with Major Posnick, and the first thing we realize is like, wow, just as you said earlier, where's the intel? And I relied on you and the S2, and like, how are we going to get this information? And so we all started kind of trying to figure it out what it is that this area that we call Bakuba, what does it mean, Diyala province? And so when I went in there, the first thing you do is you always look at the map and then you look at the immense battle space. And that's the first thing that hits you. And then you think about, what are the assets available that we can throw to that problem? And there's not enough. We're scratching platoons, we're taking contact, we're losing vehicles, we're losing equipment. We're trying to replace it. We're trying to keep the pressure on the enemy where we thought he was. We were executing missions, that we thought could surprise him and, building towards the unifying goal of what we call achieving a milestone, a win. But I sometimes think that when I was in that particular position with Major Posnick, who I'll call Andy right now, because, it's just the way we were, he had a unique way of coming in and go, this is where I think we need to be. And he would like pinpoint. I'd ask him, like, where'd you get this information? He wouldn't tell me. And he would say, and he was out there circulating the battlefield and getting certain intel, and he'd come back in, and this is where I want us to go plan it. And I would I'd go in his office, and it'd be a little, of something scratched on it. And then you come in the office, and he'd write down, this is where I think we should be and how we should do it. And I remember joking about, well, who are you going to give me, man? Where's the staff? And he says, between your ears. It's like, you know how that feels. But that's when I came to you guys. That's when I knew that the battalion came together, man. You guys were amazing. I mean, I didn't have to ask for anything. You gave me the information. We put it together, and of course, I'm kind of thinking of that big operation where we rescued all the Shia prisoners. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it was the largest prison rescue in the Iraq War. Prisoners that we had saved, and I tell you, that was one of the high points that I think of, where the unit came together on a little bit of information. We went into what many would call a very dangerous area, and we did it with no one getting hurt. We rescued all those guys, and I still have some of the photos of them being flown out, and I remember the joy on their faces. Can you imagine, these people, these Shia prisoners that were locked up by Al Qaeda with God knows what kind of future they would have. And, we came in and we did it. That job was interesting. I remember the engineer company commander. One day I was on the dry erase board and I drew a line, and he was right behind me, and he was looking at me, and he goes, Alex, I'm sorry that you have to do this. We all know that. But the time that you took to draw that line with a ruler is why we trust you. That hurt. I was like, I definitely stopped crying then. I was winding up to that moment, but he put me straight. And if you can remember, we had some good times, like, because I never felt like I was doing it by myself. Like, I just felt like we were all together. It always felt that way. I'd walk around, hey, what do we got to do this? Logistically, Babs, Alex Babington. Oh, that's nothing. Nothing, to him, but to me, it's a huge logistical problem. But he made it happen. I'd come to you, and you guys would just always give me information that I don't know how you got it. And when I really think back on how we put those operations together, and the battle space that we occupied, I'm proud of that. I can't put my name on it. I wish I could list every soldier that was on that headquarters staff. Those are the real heroes. Everybody was pulling way above their weight class. We were punching way above our weight class. And I can even remember one time, do you remember, was it General Nixon? I can't remember. He came in and he saw the company commanders, and we were introducing and we're telling about Bakuba, and he's like, like most senior leaders, and I'm sure he's expecting another tough tour for a unit. But at the end of our time in Bakuba, especially right when he was leaving, he flew over and he came in and he went into the talk and he called us together, and he's looking at us. And I remember him saying that he goes, I had to see you guys. I don't know why. I could not leave Iraq without seeing your faces. And I remember me and Alex Babington were the only two left from the original group before the commanders had changed out. I wish they were there also, but I remember the way he said it. But we were in the talk when he was saying that. And I remember looking around going, yeah, man, this is my family. This is how I still say many of us got home. And our boys out there, boys and girls, that were outside the wire doing the mission, they definitely, those heroes, they did a lot. But when I look at what HHC as a company did internally, externally, how we were supporting and also providing as force multipliers, the scouts going out doing what they could. I don't know, I just never, I look back on it now, the planning was hard, it was long, but those aren't the bad memories I thought would keep me, you know, up, years later. I look at those now as the moments where I took pride, you know, because I remember I liked what Frank did when, our barbecues, remember that? We would
Oh
have
yeah.
it, you know, that was such a huge place for us to decompress, you know, and a lot of the pressure that we had, I think, was exterminated in those barbecues. I have pictures of them, and I look back on them, and, you know, I think, they held us together, you know, and it was a privilege that we had, at least by being on the FOB, you know, because when we visit our, you know, our brother warriors out there on those outposts, and those are some horrible conditions that they had to suffer, you know. And so it definitely keeps you humble, you know, and really kind of removed my anger. You know, I think we kind of talked about, you know, like, you know, this is my role, this is my place, you know, and being outside the wire every day was not my place, you know, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to get out there, you know, and do what we're all trained to do and want to do. But then what really I found surprising was Major Posnick ended up taking us out. You know, we were doing all kinds of missions and going out, and I remembered, you know, and it was I tell you, I it was one of the things I really admired about him. He didn't let us just sit in that room and plan. Like we had to go out there and see it and feel it so we could come back in there and know what the guys were dealing with. Get on those roads and see what they were facing, and that helped. I think I want to say our guys really put together some good operations that helped out the team in a way I'm very proud to remember. I hope you remember it that way.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying, I truly remember, and I would say for future HHC commanders out there, like what you're talking about is a master level class of being a helpful, good HHC commander versus being what you experience most of the time. An HHC commander who doesn't really understand the role of being a staff enabler. They just come in there and start barking and acting like they run the talk, which as you and I know, that's what your battalion XO does. But you, and at this time, you did pin major, right? If I'm
Yeah,
remembering
I did. I
correctly.
did. You're right.
So
I
here you
did.
are as another major, HAC commander, but you just integrated in and then used your influence as the commander, which you never had to remind us you were the commander, but you were able to just pull us all and do exactly what you were talking about. You know, you almost had your own little FUOP staff, and we were able to knock these things out. And yes, now I didn't call him Andy. We called him Pause, the Pause. But yes, the Pause, yes, he'd grab, you know, I think John had a couple good stories. I remember, you know, random pause, like, all right, hey, come on, we're going to go do something. And you'd end up at Gabe, then you end up somewhere else. And as you were talking about his intelligence, you know, he'd come in like, yeah, this is where I want you. And you'd be like, well, how did you get that? Well, you know, and it's like, yeah, you're doing your own battlefield circulation, which was great because, you know, that was another way to go around the obstacles that may have existed. You know, don't want to throw anyone on the bus or throw any company under the bus, but you know, there may have not been enough information coming up. So somebody took it upon themselves, or Paz took it upon himself and said, all right, we're going to go get the information. Let's go. And you'd go and go exploring.
That was exactly it. Yeah. I miss them. I really do. Yeah. I kind of like to think maybe, you know, this time that we have left here on this planet, spend it well.
Yeah. I mean, that no truer words have been spoken. And, you know, we got to maximize our time here. And a lot of great people have been affected by directly from the war itself and then afterwards. And I think we can kind of just leave it at that. But definitely a
Yeah.
tough subject.
Very agreed.
So you're the FUOPS JC commander, and now we get another curveball of just curveballs of the deployment. Oz switches, and now in comes Major Adams.
Yeah.
Any thing you remember from that time period? Because that was more towards what, like the last
It was
quarter, right?
real. It was real. You know, I'm glad you mentioned them. You know, there were two different personalities. And, me and the pods, we had our own style of, I just remember doing everything with him, being in the track. But Major Adams, what I really enjoyed about him was he was a silent professional also. His demeanor was very respectful. He was intelligent. And I really appreciated his understanding of the battlefield. You didn't have to explain to him. It seemed like he came in and he already had done his homework and was just as helpful and as professional. And one of the reasons why I say that, and I know you've experienced it and you've seen it, the most dangerous time for a unit is when you get in and when you leave. And so just because our tour is ending, that's when we start getting more nervous because we know that things tend to start happening during that time. And he definitely was a a key part of making sure we all came home the way we arrived, intact. And I definitely can look back on his experience, his leadership, the guidance he put, his planning. He didn't waste my time. That's something that sometimes you when you're dealing with an officer that doesn't understand what it is that they're asking for, and the staff just moves in different directions. He was not that. He knew clearly what he desired and how to put things into motion, and I just found it easy to work for him. I couldn't have asked for a better replacement. I was nervous, and me splitting up the pods for me. That was, I
I
didn't.
didn't.
That kept me
That
up.
kept me up. Oh yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, it's hard to put into words what the whole pause was, but yes, the switch, but like you were saying, the humbleness of he knew what he was doing. He being Adams, he knew he did his homework. He had a great experience, but he never came off and did the "I'm the smartest man in the room." He
No,
never wasted your time. He never talked down to, I mean, at least from my experience, I never saw him belittling people. I mean, it was a very positive. And then, we all love the pause, and pause had his way. Adams came in and he changed and did things his way, but yet it was a good change.
yeah,
Maybe we should do a couple more sand tables out there, and so everybody has their ways. And he was a great addition. And like you were saying, at this time, the battlefield was changing, and it wasn't just the battlefield. As you were talking about in the beginning, we went from the time, or not the time, well, yeah, tiny unit in a giant defac to now there is 2 brigades, a whole bunch of enablers, and they built that addition onto the defac because there were so many people there. But Warhorse became a crowded place. It became a dangerous place. I mean, you had strikers rolling around and you don't realize how quiet those things are. And, you could give a lot of credit to Major Adams for just keeping our unit, like you said, deploy or redeploy the way we deployed. You got to
yeah.
give him a high five and tip the hat and say, "Thank you, good sir."
That was you're right, when it got busy, and what a strange comparison from that empty circus tent to how filled it got. And it stayed intense the whole time with all those units. If you remember the ones that were always firing for troops in contact, that was always something that I always found interesting. I remember I used to think like, man, who is out there that needs this help, or whether it's harassing fire or not, those guns just stayed firing. There was just something going on as each unit rolled in and we got larger and bigger. And I do think that as we were going out, I kind of wonder like, well, did we win anything? But when I look back on it, we did bring a lot more calmness. I don't know if I want to use the word peace, or that might be outside my expertise on truly what was achieved in that area. But there was calmness. We put, the units all started working together the way it should have been from the beginning. And I left feeling like, you know what, our efforts helped grow a success. It was for other units to take and build on. I always kind of refrain from saying we did this because it's every unit builds upon the other and we just keep moving, rolling the ball forward. We did our part in Bakuba 2006, 2007. That was our time frame, and we helped achieve a lot of those successes. And then the other units came in and built from it and did wonderful things. And then the ones that came with us and did their missions, from the end. 2ID. I mean, they were like, those units were great. I mean, we needed them. God, did we need them. They definitely took the stress off our backs.
Yeah. I agree. It's tough to say peace or say there was like a winning or point, but you brought up the whole rescuing of the civilians and other little things, but that's also when the layers really started coming back and showing what the human aspect and the human toll and the civilian tolls that were going on. And that's when you saw these prisons, these torture facilities, these execution, the mass grave sites. So it's tough to say peace. At least a lot of that sectarian violence was rooted out. And then also as the surge moved its way through Iraq and the hardcore fighters who did want to stand and fight in Bakuba, they found their peace or their exit from this world. And like you were saying, that foundation building and all those just continuing to help build so the next unit can be more successful. A couple people, I don't know if you remember Sergeant Major Huggins. He was from 5.
Yeah, I remember. I
Appar-
remember of them.
Apparently, he returned back, and I don't want to misquote him, but we've talked a few times, and but he returned back. I want to say like 2010. And he was saying night and day. The city it's alive. There's stores. It's vibrant.
Yeah, yeah,
The violence definitely was down to very minimum. And, we've had a couple Iraqi nationals reach out, Iraqi citizens reach out and say, hey, yeah, we'll make videos and we would love to give our opinion of where we are now and how the city is. And that kind of leads to this project and the end state of getting a documentary. And hopefully the last phase of that is providing some closure. So you and I have talked, mine now being a mental health professional, working at a couple different facilities, working with a lot of veterans. There are so many people that just have no closure of their time and their service. And for our group, this '06 to '08 is how can we provide some sense of closure that it was for something?
that I'm glad you said that because that comment about Sergeant Major Huggins, I had the fortunate experience. So when I was the 135 Armor Battalion Commander, one of the on my last deployment, I was in Kuwait, Iraq primarily, and I was personally assisting a division commander, the ninth. No, I'll hold his name just to keep for operational security and things like that. But this particular general, I loved him. Oh my God, we were peas in a pod. We had so much fun. But he gets it he gets it in his head, and he's like, "I want you to come to Baghdad with me." And I started laughing. I was like, "This is 2017," and I'm like, "Sadie," which is sir in Iraq, Arabic, and I'm like, that's not going to happen. He says, call your general. So I called the stat, at that time, my XO, my S3, and I go, hey, you're not going to believe this, but this is what he wants. And they laugh. That's not going to happen. I said, make the call. Stop laughing. So they make the call. It runs up. And I don't know how, but I get back a call and it was approved. And I was like, just stunned. And so I called my general, I said, Sadie, it was approved. And he laughed. He goes, you thought it wasn't? And I think he had something to do with it. Doesn't matter. I don't care. And so, the next morning we get into his vehicle, you got this entourage. I mean, I was better protected on that convoy than I ever was in Iraq. I mean, and we rolled to Baghdad and we get there and I'm looking around and I'm like, my God, this isn't what I remember. And we get out and he's showing me some things and there's this kid and I'll never, so help me God, forget this. And he's looking at me, oh, American, and we were talking and somehow my interpreter says, yeah, he remembers you. And I'm like, really? Like, from what, not me personally, but, the American Army. And I'm like, well, what does he remember? He goes, tank, big tank. He goes, but I was little. I don't remember. He thought that was the coolest thing. He's telling me the story when he was 4, when there was a tank in front of his house. But that was his memory. Like, it was hard to believe that there were people, like, to them, they were like, they grew up without that experience. Like, it was shocking. And I was like, you know what? Maybe there was something out of it. And then another story, real quick here, before we close out. I was sitting with that same general, and I was going in with his staff, and I got in pretty high. It was a lot of fun. I was meeting a lot of the senior leaders in the Iraqi army, and they actually gave me an award, certificate of achievement. I'm real proud of. And I'm in there by myself with my interpreter. And on the TV, you can see the statue. Remember that famous with the Marine 88 that pulls down the Saddam statue and it breaks apart. And for some reason, I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my goodness. And it's playing on their TV, showing all that drama of life. And I'm like, I wasn't sure if this was going to go bad on me or if they were going to be mad. I don't know why, but I just thought. And one of the generals looks at me and he goes, why are you feeling like that? And he spoke great English. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. I just want to make sure that, our invasion is not seen as positive for it by everyone. And he goes, that's not how we see it. He goes, what's that day you celebrate in America? What is it? And he's like this. He's like, that day. And I'm like, what day are you talking about? And he goes, the 4th of July. Yeah, the 4th of July. That's how we celebrate it. And I was stunned that they celebrate that day and nobody here in America knows it. Whether they do that today, I don't know anymore. But that was a big celebration day for them. And I kind of like to think that that was my takeaway. You know what? I'm not sure why we had to go there. I don't care. It's not. We're beyond those days. But we maybe maybe we did leave one particular area a little bit better. I don't know. That's where I'm.
That's a great story, and that's what a
my heart.
experience to do that. I mean, to have that experience of going back and having that experience in that room. So, thank you for sharing. I mean, that's a powerful story.
I appreciate it.
You were saying earlier how Bakuba affected you as a battalion commander and how you trained your battalion. Is there any kind of thoughts or anything you want to share from that or expand on that?
We all carried our experiences differently, but still in the same format. And for me, I couldn't see the soldiers. Like I saw their age, but I couldn't, how do you say, remove what we knew already could happen just because they didn't know. You did a good job explaining about our train up for the National Training Center and JRTC, getting, that scripted. I remember approaching my guys and I'd probably say as a takeaway, I said, do what I'm thinking, not what I say. That's what you have to do. We all have to be able to do that. And most of the problems, the tactical problems that we did, the certification process, I dealt more with the human development of the leader. Like I knew our training programs, all those big events, that'll teach you the actual skills to maneuver and do the things that you need to do with your platforms. But the actual human dimension, the actual leader, that's a different subject. And I think I learned more about it when I was an instructor at the maneuver captain's career course here at Benning. And that was an area that I focused. That's what my experiences came out as an instructor and definitely as a battalion commander. I did everything on the leader, and I would do certification exercises for the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant to be together. Like we had a tabletop simulation, and I had my S2, I had my S3, I had my fires guy, and we literally would take his platoon and whatever the context of that particular training objective was, and I'd have him maneuver. He'd talk to me like on the radio. I needed to hear him like talk to me how you would talk to me on the radio. Like I was big on the radio. I need to hear your voice. And it was hard on them actually. I was surprised. And I was also surprised at how unprepared some of them were, and these were some of my platoon sergeants because by the time I was a battalion commander, you gotta remember Iraq was in the distance. Afghanistan was already dying down. So there weren't many veterans left, which was shocking. There were not that many veterans. So I took over my battalion in 2016, and there were very few actual veterans. It was like twice as hard to train that unit on experiences that we thought were routine. So it was a lot of fun. I love that job. But I want to say HHC 112 was the heart of 135 Armor for me. It gave me all the tools I needed. I don't know if I really explained much, but
No, you answered it very well. Like I would say, what you were talking about is one of the reasons Well, pretty sure that's one of the reasons why I ended up getting a command was being a veteran, and, it was during that whole "Get ready for North Korea, get ready for North Korea." But just like what you're talking about, the human aspect is the part that none of this other training really gets you ready for, and something that we talked about with great lengths here, and then just in our conversations over time, the human loss, and that when the bad day happens, how do you move forward? And that's something that resiliency, yes, it's a buzzword in the military or buzzword in the army, but how do you really train and test I'm sorry, now I'm just tongue
And
tied.
resiliency. I was tearing me up the other day. I sometimes, when I look at that, you can be effective, you can be successful, and you can be respected and still be carrying injuries that no one sees, including yourself. And for me, it took a while to realize through therapy too. Trauma isn't a failure of character. Sometimes it's the price of responsibility. And the actual healing, it doesn't undo your service, but it definitely helps you understand it. That was kind of a flip for me, was how do I really review this career of mine that I had? But talking about it later is still better than never talking about it at all. I mean, that's for sure. I think many of us can agree that we were bringing home a lot of stress. We called it professionalism. That's how we dealt with it. And sometimes, when you look at the uniforms we all have, and you got these decorations and you got these awards, but you're being rewarded for achieving something that is sometimes bad. It was a hard thing that we had to do to get that award. When you reflect back on it and you go, you know what? I can't look at that as a reward for the what we endured. It has to be a reflection of the positive of what we all did to win. Take out the bad and focus more on the word of winning and building resiliency. I do believe now is talking about, I mean, you and me were talking about it. I stayed quiet 8, 10 years. I don't know, didn't reconnect. But now slowly, it's like, wow, coming back, talking to people, former soldiers. Unfortunately, sometimes the places we have to gather aren't the times we want to, you know. But they're definitely more funny and good stories than some of the bad that, I forget, like the barbecues, and there were some positive times, that I have to remember, to get to that word resiliency. That's a
Yeah.
powerful word. Powerful word.
I would tell you those barbecues, our little, Xbox network that we ran through the chews, and, every once in a while, those little video game tournaments we'd get going. But those were the things that help break things up and help all of us make it. And fond memories, Nothing like, playing a little Halo, or I don't even know what else we were playing back then, but you're playing with your company commander and he's, everybody's shit talking and having a good time, and they were able just to be normal for a couple minutes.
Do you remember that's one of my favorite. I remember I'd go into the talk and your guys, and they'd like, "Sir, why don't you come on and play?" Like, man, I don't have time for that, and they were like, "Come on." I can't remember what it was. Like, they wore me down. And I remember I said, "You know what? Okay." And I remember I thought he was one of your guys, but he jumped like, "Oh my God, the commander's gonna play." And remember they went and they rewired the shoes. I don't know how they did it. They connected everything together. And I'm like, okay. And then we finally, the night we're supposed to play, we all log on, and they had changed their gamer tags. And they put "He who kills the commander, Commander Slayer." I laughed so much. I mean, they were like, I couldn't say nothing, like I was getting beat up by my Joes, and they were proud of it, When I saw their gamer tags, that was, they will put on a smile on my face to the day I pass.
You were a very good sport about it. I think there was a couple others that were like, "Sorry, Martin, that wasn't cool. You guys shouldn't be doing that to your commander." I was like, "Hey, he agreed to play with them. Like at some point, he did not yell at any of us, so I think it went okay that day."
It went great. I'm glad I didn't put no money on it because I didn't win anything. They schooled me up, but it was definitely one of my high points of that deployment. We found joy wherever we could.
I think that is a great talking point or bullet point for that deployment. You find joy when you can. Okay, so how I kind of like to wrap these things up, and then of course we can do some editing here and fix things up, whatever. What how I kind of like to close these things out is giving you the last talking point, and if there's a subject or I don't want to say a bumper sticker, or if you prepared a closing statement, I'll edit it out so it's not like a formal closing statement. Basically, I like to give you the last word and give you an opportunity to just kind of say whatever is on Alex's mind. But before we get there, I don't want to get too mushy here. I don't want to mess up your closing thought, but I've told you before, I'll say it again, I appreciate you. Your leadership during those hard times was great. It was a breath of fresh air for myself. I always miss those days in the little plans office and also that. So I'm like, what are you doing? Warrant officer? No, you're wasting your time. You're doing officer stuff. You're doing officer shit. Go be an officer. And you were definitely a key role in pushing me the direction I went into. So I always enjoy our catching up and our conversations. I definitely want to make sure to say thank you again because I would not my career would have went probably a different direction or who knows where it would have went. The best of worst times. I mean, it truly sums that up, and those were the best of worst times.
Wow, I really appreciate that. And one, I'm real proud of you. I mean, I can't just to see what you achieved in that time frame, I mean, there's just nothing better when you see someone move forward in a way that you have. I mean, it's been positive, especially now and the role that you play, the position that you have, how you're the one now helping us. That's incredible. It's definitely helping me, in my own healing. And I hope and pray that, you'll continue. And, you don't even have to worry about sending it to me for review. I trust you. What we said here is between you and me. You know who I am. I know you. And I have no doubt, I have no worries about you taking advantage of me. So you do what you need to do. As a closing thought, I don't know. Those are always, what's on my mind, I just probably have to say, for sure that the talking is definitely becoming easier. That's the key. And more important now because unfortunately we've had to meet in places that we didn't want to meet. And some of our guys are still paying the price from those experiences that it's just sad and unimaginable. I still visit Andy's gravesite, it's up here where I live takes me about 30 minutes and we're going to go up there and me and my wife are going to pay our respects, make sure he's got some flowers for Christmas. You can ever imagine Andy getting flowers. But, I kind of said it earlier, trauma isn't a failure of a character, but it's definitely a price of responsibility. And I think we need to come back together as a family and talk about it and kind of illuminate those areas where we were gray and like, did that really happen? Or, you know what, that was funny, because sometimes, out here, sometimes we kind of think of it like the real world. We have our experiences are so intense. They're not consumable for the general population, if that makes sense. They're not easy subjects to talk about. And so we internalize a lot. And what you end up having, what I feel is we end up keeping a lot of anger. If it's not anger, it's frustration, whatever that emotion is, and it's bottled up, and that's not good. And so doing this I didn't know how it was going to go. I'm not sure how it will be received, but I don't care. It feels good knowing that I felt like I was talking to HHC again in 112. I don't see all the faces, but I kind of feel like they're all here. So I appreciate it. And I will do whatever you needed me to help. Proud of you, proud of all our guys. Let's keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, history and healing, and that's the big part of all this. And it's great, you and I've talked about it. I appreciate you doing this because people from HHC need to see the HHC leadership. They need to hear, hey, you're still here. We're all still family. You think about us, and it's okay to talk. I mean, there's still people that will say, you know what, if Colonel Rivera can talk, I can talk. So yeah, it's a great opportunity in history and healing. That's all the debrief project does.
Well, like